Hi, John. How are you today?
Good, Elliot. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving week last week. And I know you guys got some snow. Are you still dealing with that?
Milwaukee's good at moving snow because we get
Mhm.
it. So things are okay. It's certainly below average in terms of temperatures. Today is supposed to be 30, but I think tomorrow the high is supposed to be 17. So it'd be nice to still be in the 30s or even low 40s, but otherwise, we're okay. And we had a great Thanksgiving. You too?
Yeah, we did. We had all three of our grandkids. So that was great. There's so much going on. There's no way we can cover all of it this week. So we're going to do our best, in part because some of this occurred during Thanksgiving week, but obviously a lot also occurs every day, as we've talked about many, many times. But I want to start off with a head scratcher here among many head scratchers throughout 2025. The Trump administration, or the president specifically, has pardoned the former Honduran president, Juan Orlando Hernandez, who you may remember was convicted by a U.S. court last year on charges that he ran a narco state that helped send South American cocaine to the United States. This was a jury trial. The investigations happened during multiple administrations. He was released earlier this week from a penitentiary where he was supposed to serve 45 years in prison. Again, as we are attempting to deal with narco terrorism, transnational criminal organizations, the fact of this pardon is baffling to say the least. And I will say today, prior to the recording, I will just put it this way. I was watching a report where a member of the Senate was asked what he thought of this pardon, and the answer was, I haven't had a chance to do research on that, so I don't want to opine on something that I'm not aware of. The reporter followed up with the specifics, and this particular individual said, I'm sorry, when I don't have enough research, I don't respond with a point of view. I find that also extremely interesting. I'll just leave it at that.
I don't know what to do with that.
There's nothing you can. There's nothing you can do with it. I should also say that right before we recorded, Trump also pardoned a Democrat, former Representative Henry Cuellar, who he and his wife were convicted of bribery and was supposed to be serving. I don't remember what the prison sentence was, and he was pardoned as well. So again, bipartisan pardoning, I suppose, is the way to look at some of what's been going on.
All right, so let's go international first. A bunch of things going on in the EU. I would say the most interesting is that the European Commission has decided to add Russia to the EU's AML blacklist. This has not been publicly announced, but there have been several leaked reports, and it's the result of members of the European Parliament requesting that Europe really focus on its own blacklist and not just follow FATF. As we know, FATF has not blacklisted Russia since the invasion of Ukraine. They have suspended their membership, but that doesn't have the same effect. It'll be interesting to see what happens here, and this will apply in the EU to financial institutions, real estate firms, insurers, and others.
Staying with the EU, a report I just was able to see is that the EU has clinched their deal to phase out Russian gas imports by 2027, and that will end the bloc's 57-year energy relationship with Moscow. They struck this agreement early this morning to phase out this, as I said, by 2027. And according to one of the Finnish member of parliament, what happened today is historic achievement with Europe, showing that we will never again be dependent on Russian gas and there will be a permanent exit from it. And that's obviously related to what you just referenced.
Yes, the EU also has taken down an organization called Crypto Mixer, which is a cryptocurrency mixing service suspected of helping cyber criminals launder stolen funds. And according to a press release from Europol, Crypto Mixer has mixed over 1.3 billion in Bitcoin since its creation in 2016. For our listeners who aren't familiar, crypto mixers scramble crypto from different users. This obscures the origin and the destination of the funds, so making them more undetectable. And related to that, but this is in the US, an organization called Samurai Wallet was announced by the US Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York that the two founders of that organization were sentenced 1 to 5 years, 1 to 4 years. The interesting thing about this is that this cryptocurrency mixing application was explicitly designed to hide illegal financial transactions. A number of years ago, these two fellows sat down and said, there's an underserved market here, and we need to build a product to serve that market, and went on to the dark web and other places to actually solicit users of their service. So this was a money laundering project, not someone who got into it by mistake. So kind of interesting.
Switching over to Canada, a couple things to reference. One is FINTRAC updated its compliance guidance on politically exposed persons. Obviously, a lengthy document that you should read. A couple things I just want to highlight. They expand the definition of a domestic politically exposed person, something that we don't see here in the States, obviously. And they also explain who is a foreign politically exposed person and the compliance requirements that go with that. They also do add in international organizations. Actually, the definition is, quote, head of an international organization, unquote. And there's also some requirements with that. Family members are referenced in there as well. Pretty lengthy document. I've looked at some things. Somebody that we follow on LinkedIn that I think folks should follow if they don't already is Matthew Coughlin. Matthew's really great at explaining some of these things that he goes through, and he gives you his take on some of the highlights there. But that's the one aspect of what we saw with FINTRAC that I wanted to highlight. And there was one more, Elliot.
They published a new operational alert related to laundering the proceeds of online child sexual exploitation.
Yes, right, exactly.
An important document for people to read. I know many of our listeners are not in Canada, but I think many of the documents that come out of FINTRAC have good, instructive sections for us, regardless of where we're located, because many things like this problem are global problems, and the commonalities are much more than the inconsistencies. That would be another one to look at, both on the FINTRAC, available on the FINTRAC website.
Coming back to the U.S., a couple things to highlight. On the Senate side, Senator Elizabeth Warren, Chris Van Hollen sent a letter to the Treasury and others. This is related to what we've talked about since it occurred, and that is the pausing of the Corporate Transparency Act, or at least I wouldn't call it the pausing, the elimination of domestic entities having to report under the Corporate Transparency Act. Holland and Warren are making the connection that there is the need to reinstate those requirements because of the Chinese money laundering networks that everybody on both sides of the aisle has highlighted as a major concern for law enforcement and national security.
The issue that they specifically mention a recent situation that used over 100 shell companies to launder multi-million dollars worth of narcotics proceeds. So the connection there is Corporate Transparency Act was intended to demystify shell companies and make them ineffective as a place to hide illegal gains. And yet, while we're worried about Chinese money laundering organizations, which have essentially turned money laundering into a service, we're taking apart bipartisan supported tools. So we'll see where that goes.
You want to mention what FinCEN did? They issued an alert, and then I want to reference a couple of OCC items after you do that.
Sure. So they issued a new alert on cross-border funds transfers involving illegal aliens. So the alert focuses on the effort to prevent exploitation of the U.S. financial system by illegal aliens seeking to move illicitly obtained funds, including by moving them cross-border. This is related in some ways to the geographic targeting orders to MSBs along the southwest border. They noted that they previously cautioned that bad actors have used low dollar cross-border funds transfers to facilitate or commit terrorist financing, narcotics trafficking, and other illicit activity. They did acknowledge that many remittances that go cross-border are legitimate. And like most alerts, they indicated that if you file a SAR related specifically to this, there's particular language they want you to put in field 2. You can see the alert for that. Worth a quick read. It's only 2 pages, so not in depth, no red flags, not a lot of distinction between what it's targeted at and the large volume of legal remittances that are flowing.
The Office of Comptroller of the Currency and their current comptroller, Jonathan Gould, testified before the House this week, and you can take a look at the written testimony. But a couple of things the OCC has done in the past 2 weeks that warrant reference. One is Bulletin 2025-37, and this is amending the examination procedures for community banks. So there's reference throughout the bulletin that they're attempting to reduce burden on community banks, and they do make some statements suggesting there's less of a risk with community banks regarding certain activities in the financial crime space. I leave for others to debate that question, but the highlights, if you will, of the bulletin include giving examiners discretion to place reliance as appropriate on independent testing that forms a basis for conclusions. For exam procedures, allow them to carry forward prior cycle examination conclusions for one cycle for the training and BSA compliance officer pillars in instances where there's not been a significant change in the bank's risk profile, which is also interesting because, as we know, risk assessments need to be done on a fairly regular basis to determine if you're adding new products or new geographic regions that could expand your risk profile, and then whether the extent to perform transaction testing or limit testing to analytical or other reviews. Before I mention anything else that jumps out at you, Elliot?
If the idea that community banks present less risk because they don't present systemic risk, I guess I would agree with that. But there are community banks that fit in that definition now that are pretty big.
Right.
And we have seen both procedure or process issues across the spectrum of banks, both size and geography. But there have been some significant money laundering events happening through banks. And I've said before, a lot of this dialing back of regulations may be setting us up for the next banking crisis. It probably won't be mortgages, but it'll be something. Maybe it'll work on the ground, but I'm not convinced yet.
So interestingly enough, the other thing that they did that you highlighted for me around the same time is they will no longer collect information through the money laundering risk system, the MLR system. And according to the bulletin, they say they're immediately discontinuing the mandatory data collection. They believe there's alternative, less burdensome means of assessing banks' money laundering or terrorist financing risk, and they think it's no longer necessary. They said this is part of the OCC's ongoing commitment to appropriate risk-based supervision. So again, this data will no longer be available. Take a look at the bulletin to see what alternative methods they are actually referring to. I guess the last thing to mention is Gould also put on the OCC LinkedIn page a statement on a report issued by only the majority of the House Financial Services Committee. It was not a bipartisan report on, quote, debanking, unquote. You can check out the website, and the report is under the auspices of the chairman, French Hill, and the subcommittee chairman, Dan Muser. This is titled Operation Choke Point 2.0, Biden's Debanking of Digital Assets, unquote. Based on what's in the 53-page report, don't take our word for it, take a look at it, that there was a targeting going on during the previous administration of entities that dealt with digital assets, and that because of the executive order that we've talked about earlier this year and other legislative policy discussions, that this is going to be addressed completely going forward. I don't know what else to say about this. Read the report. I've said to this group before, folks that listen to this, I think the whole debanking characterization is flawed at best. We've worked very closely, Elliot and I and others, with the de-risking issue that affects our partners in the humanitarian world. That's not mentioned anywhere in this report. It is solely focused on digital assets. And so take a look at the report. We will certainly do follow-up conversations about that, about this going forward.
OFAC issued a $4.6 million penalty on an individual for violating Russia sanctions and reporting obligations. I think it was last week that it came out. The interesting thing about this is it involved a piece of real estate owned by someone who was on the SDN list related to an oligarch. And they were added to the SDN list in March of 2022 in the wake of the Ukraine invasion. The interesting thing was when the property went into foreclosure, OFAC sent a notice to the local county register of deeds saying this is blocked property, and they put that in the public record. The person who bought the property would have been aware of that. They then proceeded to go and get a mortgage on the property to do rehabbing and made a statement to the lender that they had free and clear title, which of course they didn't because it was blocked property, and then later sold the property without disclosing any of that to the buyer. It was very weird to me that someone would just keep plowing ahead after getting a subpoena, a cease and desist order, all this official stuff from OFAC, and just plowed straight ahead. So now they have the maximum statutory penalty of $4.6 million. And the aggravating factor, of course, is the continual intentional violations. One of the articles that I read about this commented that this does continue to show that there is sanctions risk that's relevant in the real estate space related to blocked persons and blocked assets. So I think an oddball, but an expensive oddball.
Last thing real quick, maybe we'll talk more about this going forward because there are some meetings the next couple of weeks dealing with the de-risking issue, financial inclusion issue, financial access issue as it relates to humanitarian groups that we've been working on for quite a while. But wanted to just mention that last week, the UN Human Rights Office issued a report entitled Ensuring Respect for Human Rights While Taking Measures to Counter the Financing of Terrorism. So this report was long awaited, and it talks about the definition of terrorist financing, financial intelligence issues. It also looks at the impact on nonprofits, humanitarian groups, but they also talk about the nexus of terrorism financing and trafficking in persons. Excellent analysis of something it's a pretty, I'll call it a pretty nuanced area of focus in CFT, but it's something that obviously continues to challenge everybody. And again, this report had been long awaited. I did an interview with folks from the Human Security Collective a couple weeks ago that's been posted. They talk about the concerns with Recommendation 8 from FATF. So this report is sort of consistent with the issues related from that conversation.
John, I know that you're going to be moderating our December webinar on the 18th of this month, and people can still register for that at our website. And it's going to be a year in review. So people should sign up and join that. And I know you've got a couple of interviews scheduled for podcasts. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I'm actually efforting a few of them. We will have one with the very famous in the AML world, Sarah Beth Felix, who I've asked, and she's kind enough to agree to do this, and we're going to do it next week, give her take on the year in review. Now, Elliot and I will do ours separately at some point as well, but Sarah follows all aspects of the AML community in terms of regulatory issues. So I want to get her take as both a practitioner, and she's also a banker. So that's coming up. And then I have what I hope will be something that folks in the AML space who might not think this is a spot that's directly connected to us, but I believe that it is. I'm going to be talking to a professor from Marquette University later this week on the whole issue of justice and peace and how it relates to both national security and accountability. So that's this week as well. And as always, if you're interested in doing a sit down with us, please feel free to reach out.
John, you have a great rest of the week, and I will talk to you next week.
Sounds good. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.